Welcome to this episode of the Embellish Podcast, a podcast where we focus on product stories, product storytellers, interesting brand ambassadors, and anyone else that is willing to talk to me. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully, I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, please reach out to me and let me know, and I'll try to get that taken care of. I also generally live stream the recording of these episodes on YouTube, so tune into my Instagram page where you'll get more details when those happen. You can find all of my links on Instagram at EmbellishPod or Twitter with the exact same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's also a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. This afternoon, this morning, whatever your time zone happens to be, I have the folks from Blind Barrels, a subscription service, joining me, and specifically it's Bobby. So, Bobby, I'll give you the opportunity to kind of let us know who you are and what you're about.
Hey, guys. First of all, hey, John, thanks for having me on. I see you as more than one person. That's okay. We're on here to talk about Blind Barrels. This is a blind whiskey tasting subscription. I think what a lot of people don't understand about what's in this box, besides just amazing whiskey, is this is whiskey that you literally can't buy or try in any other way. I was actually looking up the three of the four samples in our first lineup in the March box that went out. And I was like, let me just go see if I can try to buy these in some other way. And I couldn't buy them. I couldn't even get them shipped to my house. So it's what's special about this is the best American craft whiskey that you can't get. There's 3,000 whiskey distilleries throughout the country. And the distribution model kind of puts a stranglehold. There's not 3,000 spaces on the liquor stores that Total Wine and Bevmo. There's maybe 100, 200 brands that are there. So what happens is there's really a three-tier situation. Some people say Prohibition never really ended, because what happened was once Prohibition ended, there are the producers, which is the distilleries. It passes through a distributor, and then it lands at a retail element, which is what we are, to be able to then pass to the consumer. Now, what happens is a lot of these brands are in the catalog of a distributor, and there's like 7 of them that are massive, and there's these huge catalogs, and they get lost in that catalog. And really, it's almost like you got to pay the boots on the ground guys, the salesmen that have relationships with the liquor stores, just to get that shelf space. And let's just say you get that shelf space. If they're not pushing it and people aren't trying it and then buying it and fall in love with it, then these distilleries have to pay the FOB and all the costs to get their product back. And a pallet could be 50 cases, and it can actually crush distilleries that are just startups that are growing. So we blind taste everything before they're in our lineup. A lot of people think, can somebody buy their way into your lineup? No, we go through to get the first 16 samples that are in the first total boxes of the 4 boxes of our first year. We tried over 150 different whiskeys. And I'd love to say that everybody in craft is making some amazing stuff, but the reality is 2/3 of it's a little bit too weird, or it's not very good because they're just starting out. But there's some amazing whiskey out there that I think blows the door off of some of the tater favorites that are out there. We had in our lineup Corbin Cash in our first lineup, and we did a blind tasting with 8, and it beat Old Carter bourbon in the lineup in a blind tasting, to just kind of show you how strong some of this whiskey is. So no one can buy their way into our lineup. We literally blind taste everything. And that's what this experience is. It took a while to figure out how to legally do this, so that, our bottles that have our branding on it says samples A, B, C, and D on it. And what happens is once you go through the experience, you try the whiskey. There's a reveal. There's a QR code on the other side of this table, the tasting table. And it tells you the mash bill, the location, the history of the distillery. If you want to buy a bottle of it, you can. Some of them, there's a limited amount. Like we're doing a barrel pick in June, and there's only X number of cases available of that particular whiskey. And so some of it there's limited run. A lot of the stuff you can't get. So if you want to discover some brands and, have things that your friends can't have and fall in love with a couple of these small brands that are doing some amazing things, this is what Blind Barrels is all about, showcasing these small town farmers and distillers that are growing their own grain. They're mashing it, they're milling it, they're distilling it with love, and they're making some amazing handmade products.
That's awesome. And I've been long a proponent of one of two things is sort of the future of whiskey in North America. It's either, and they're I guess sort of tied to each other. It's either craft distilleries or American single malt, because those are places where you can explore new flavor profiles, do new things. And a lot of your American single malt is craft, right? There's not a ton of people who are doing that at a higher than craft level. It is. It's exciting segment. that exists. You mentioned on here, you're basically creating virtual shelf space for craft distillers to increase their reach and their ability to grab new market, which is amazing. That's fantastic. And you said 150 whiskeys, 2/3 of which are going to be too weird or too young. And so you've got your 16 for 2022 that you've picked out, and I think that's what you said. If
Well, it's
you
interesting.
taste,
Like
go ahead.
too young is kind of a weird dynamic, right? Because
Right.
some of these distillers are aging them in smaller barrels. Now, some of the people from the old guard don't like that. Obviously, there's rapid maturation, which we're not having anyone in our lineup that's doing that, because that maybe is a little bit goes against the actual barrel creating the flavors and things like that. But we had a 2-year in our first lineup that was everybody loved, and it was really easy. And yeah, you can get a little bit more of that grain than the wood when you're tasting something that's younger. But we're also trying to dispel the myth that, it has to be aged 12 years and has to be.
Right.
Now, that being said, we do have a 16-year barrel pick rye finished in a Weller barrel in our June lineup. That is insanely good. So I'll tell you, every lineup that we're doing is getting better and better and better. March was great. June is 100% a banger. And there's some stuff in there that, yeah, there's still going to be some 2 and 3 years. I don't know if we're going to do White Dog at some point. We might do it as an educational component and do something that's unaged. There actually is some White Dog out there that's really good. When you look at the way that they're doing their yeast strain and different things like that. Wilderness Creek's a great example of that. Dr. Pat, he went from doing like a few hundred barrels to doing like 5 million or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. But like the guy's building rick houses, actually he's building barrels because he has a lab that he creates all these yeast strains in.
Yep.
So he never had to really debt finance anything. He was able to do it because he had this other business model. But if you go to Wilderness Trail and you try some of their unaged whiskey, it's really good. So
you're exactly right. And I guess whenever I said too young, and you're exactly right. Too young has a connotation. Some people, it's got to be 4 years, got to be 5 years, got to be 7 years, whatever the number is.
Right.
And whenever I say too young, it's meaning too young for that particular bottle itself, right? And so I don't have that kind of a palate, but educated folks can be like, this feels like this is too young for this particular one, and too young could be it's 6 months instead of a year. And I've leaned on it's not rapid aging, it's just different aging. Whether they use a smaller barrel, they use a different thing. They're just doing something inherently different than what everyone else in bourbon might be doing, because, a lot of it's aged here in Kentucky or in some parts of Tennessee or in some parts of Indiana where the climate is very, very, very similar. But you send the same thing to Texas, you send the same thing to Nevada, you send it to Washington, you're going to get very different aging techniques. And
Totally.
that's what that is. But some of these, that you're indicating, this 2/3 that are not quite ready for what you guys want to do. Is there an intent to revisit some of those brands the next year and the next year as they kind of grow in maturity as a craft distillery?
There are. I mean, one of the funnest and the hardest things to do in this lineup, besides trying whiskey, is sometimes you meet distillers that are just really good people. And I fall in love with the whiskey, and I got my whiskey wizards that are objectively looking at this. Like, I literally was just talking to the guy that owned this distillery yesterday. I got the samples Friday, and normally it takes a few weeks for me to create all these blind tastings and all these other things in these lineups for these guys. And the guy's chomping at the bit to find out. And I finally, at 10 o'clock last night, my main whiskey guy, he had 8 samples, and some of them, one of them was a collaboration with Dickel. I mean, all these interesting things that were in the lineup. And he put the one of the head distiller that I was talking about at number 1, and which I honestly thought it was good. And it was their flagship. And I was just really happy about that. But sometimes you meet a distiller that you just love these, talk to this one woman who's just a phenomenal person. And some of the stuff on their bottles that didn't say whiskey. And so we're like, well, what is this? And it's like, the reason it doesn't say whiskey on it, there's, we start kind of being a detective and looking at the fine print and seeing like, what is the thing and the nomenclature that they're using to push into what it is. And yeah, I do want to revisit them at some point because we like them enough. We know that they're growing and they're learning fast. And then sometimes you get somebody that they're in craft and you like their whiskey, but you don't like the people.
Yep.
And then you're kind of working with that. So there's
some of the craft folks are like in a swap game where they're creating a brand to sell it, and that's a market strategy that some people have, but do they have an attachment to what they're making? And I have a high degree of affinity for distillers who are making with passion instead of making with the intent to sell. I mean, there's profitability always. Like I want them to make as much money as they can, and that's a concern. But when it becomes a test tube creation, I don't know. I just don't have the same sort of connection with it.
Yeah, I mean, we got these. There's these two guys that are in our June lineup. I won't say who they are, but they're growing craft brand. They're becoming really well known, and these are just amazing dudes. Like, I mean, I'll tell you, Middle West. They were in our first lineup. Very few people have heard of Middle West. They actually are the source for Horse Soldier. Out in St. Petersburg, Florida. But in Columbus, Ohio, there's a brand called Middle West that was in our first lineup. I got to tell you, everything that we try to theirs is amazing. It was probably one of the biggest response in the first lineup of just an unknown, like, what the hell is this? It was this pumpernickel rye. It was this pumpernickel rye. And they do weeded finish. They do all this other stuff. But whenever you talk to those guys, I mean, they're just great, like Midwest people that, it's like, it's almost like you're talking to your friend in the middle of the night and you're playing with the foreign code and phone cord, like, no, you hang up first. No, you hang up. You didn't hang up. No, but there's not that weird. But there's a great rapport when you have like these great distillers that you love them and you love their product and you can't wait to just showcase their product. And if somebody goes and finds their bottle in another way, this distillery, like, do all of that. In fact, we price our full bottles. We don't do this big upsell. We create a cap on our shipping cost. Shipping alcohol sucks, by the way. Super expensive.
Right.
It's like, it's really.
I live in Kentucky. It's one of the most regressive shipping states when it comes to alcohol there is, and we make some of the largest quantities of bourbon, and I can't get it shipped to me half the time. So,
at least they opened up all the laws. Kentucky is paving the way for direct to consumer laws right now.
They're working on it, but that 3-tier. Some folks are fighting.
They're gonna work through it because at the end of the day, the Venn diagram that the liberals and conservatives agree on, or say they do, is supporting small businesses. So the wine industry did it in California. The wine industry lobbied hard to create direct to consumers. So these wine companies can ship direct to the consumer in a lot of capacities, right? And there are some state limitations for that. But Kentucky can now ship throughout the state. There's some reciprocity with some of the states that they ship to, but not the same. They kind of can do a lot of cool stuff now. DC is actually the loophole. You can Washington DC, you can ship anywhere from there. We thought about like moving there, but I'm like, I got to uproot the family, and it's like,
right? Yeah, no, I've got a few of the retailers that I purchased stuff from. They're all hubbed out of DC, and that's where they ship from. So it makes and I assume at that point they're probably just a warehouse where they're relaying stuff, but it works, and it's a functional component of getting it out there, and the state of Kentucky wants to protect the Kentucky distilleries. And so whenever you start talking about, we got somebody from Virginia that wants to ship direct to consumer in Kentucky, that's when they start kind of throwing their hands up. And we did the same thing with the wine industry in this state, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I mean, you couldn't get anything shipped into Kentucky, and then a wine kind of led the front. Like, we want to be able to ship to, like if I go out to Napa, I want to ship back a case, and legally I'm not supposed to, right? Like legally it's against the law. And so things are changing over time. You made a statement a few minutes ago that you might in the future add White Dog as an educational component. And that's so talk a little bit about your educational component, because I had an opportunity to watch through some of your videos and see sort of how you're structuring this offer. And I think it's valuable to anyone, regardless of what level of like whiskey nerd you're at, whether you're a beginner or not. But just kind of give me the idea of what that education component looks like.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm honestly barely out of the novice stage myself, in the sense that I went from being a drinker to a taster 2 years ago. And I started learning because I had done blind tastings with wine before, and like let's get the gargle with the air and the right whatever, and like, oh, I'm getting oleander. I'm like, I don't even know what that is. But there's like this whole component to, there's a snobbery to it, right? And I just loved letting my senses tell me what it is before a brand does. We've all bought that bottle before that somebody liked and then you hated, and then you try to like pour it for other people so you don't have to drink it yourself. And so like on our site, we have a masterclass. If you click on masterclass on our site, you can watch that for free. That tells you not just the tasting elements, the aroma, palate, the color, the finish, the four kind of components that go into the tasting. But we have one about mash bill. We have one about the history of whiskey, some about nomenclature. And I know a lot about those things because I shot all of that. So my backdrop is I'm a filmmaker. I've made documentaries. I made one about college athletes' rights called The Business of Amateurs. We utilized elements of that film to pass student athletes' rights for name and likeness in 12 states, and we got in front of the Supreme Court last year, and now college athletes can make money from their name and likeness. So I was a part of the zeitgeist for that. So I know a lot about what I know. Generally stems from what I shot of the masterclass, and then edited together and went through all that footage. I'd say I know more about liquor laws, having gone through the fire of trying to figure out this model. But I love the educational component. I mean, whiskey history is cool. I mean, we basically had Celtic monks that were visiting Arabia where they were distilling perfume, right? And all these different people that voyaged out there. So the Italians went back and made, grappa, or the Irish went back obviously and they made whiskey, and the Scots went back and they made Scotch because the Irish were growing rye and the Scots were growing barley, and then America. When the colonists were up on the East Coast, they weren't in Kentucky yet. Manifest Destiny hadn't moved west yet, right? So America's beverage, or what was it? America's alcohol is bourbon, right? But
historically that is inaccurate.
The native spirit is rye.
Yeah.
It wasn't until they started moving west until that happened, and then you get into the late 19th century, or where like there was as many distilleries. There was a distillery in every town. We're in the second boom right now. And the 20th century kind of killed it because you had World War I, and then you had Prohibition, and then you had World War II, and then everyone's, their tastes changed, right? So like the Mad Men era of the gimlets and martini and clear spirits, and it was, I didn't know this, but I mean, until I learned that the Japanese were really kind of a bit of the savior in a certain. There was also kind of the craft.
Yeah, they kept bourbon afloat whenever we weren't buying bourbon. Like the Japanese,
they loved American cola, they loved Levi's jeans, and they loved themselves American bourbon. Bourbon doesn't have to be just made in Kentucky; it has to be American, though, right? And so, and they get a huge allotment of the Pappy line because of that. They made a deal early on, and I mean, come on, like when you're looking at Old Granddad 1992, I mean, it was like a $12 bottle. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. There's a ton of stuff out there that, like, if I had converted my 401k over in say 2001 or 2 to bourbon, I could be retired by now. Like, because
easily, you could have just you could be Mr. Allotment, right? And you could just like, and every now and again you get an Old Granddad and tab and keep it real, right? And mix it up and go against what everybody doesn't want you to do. But absolutely, I mean, there's all these different components of what's happened that's led to this other boom. And the foodie element's done that. The artisanal movement's done that. And just the demand, still hasn't superseded the supply. And even the commercial sourcing of like the MGP, all that's really fascinating to me too. Because some people want to say, well, MGP, that's a bad thing. And it's like, well, do you like Widow Jane and Nulu? Because Penelope, and I mean, because I like all those brands. I think there are master blenders out there, and you do have to give a tip of the hat. It was the Seagram's building when Multigrain Product bought them out. They had all this sorts of whiskey. They really saved the whiskey industry in a certain capacity too. There was a lot of saviors that came into play that led to where we are now, and this finer appreciation for the spirit. And yes, I'm like you, where I can't. I can pick out the youngness a little bit now that I've been tasting a lot. I can't go, oh, what is that? Is that candied marzipan? And I'm not like, my tasting wheel is not the same. I'm more like, oh, this reminds me of that date I had in 10th grade where that girl almost let me get that. And where'd you go on that date? Oh, I was in an ice cream shop. Oh, that's waffle cone. That's,
Right.
like I have a memory usually tied to it.
That's exactly where I land on it, and I'll be honest about it. Boxes like this point out how bad I really am at tasting, right? So I'm not the guy that can pick notes out, or to some degree, you know, youngness or oldness. Like, I mean, oldness, I guess, because a lot of times old is over oaked, but most of the way that I talk about whiskey is explicitly based off of memory. It's tying it back to a particular thing that happened in my life, at some moment, and that's, I think, the attraction of brown spirits. I'm reading a book that a lady wrote that talks about her journey through Scotch, and a lot of her discussion of notes is based off of just pure memories, and that's, I don't have any really strong fond memories that I can attach back to vodka. I have some strong memories. They're not necessarily fond, right?
Or lack of memories. You're
Exactly.
right.
There
We're
was a
gonna do a
college
vodka
period.
box. Somebody once asked me, "Are you going to do a vodka box?" I'm like, down the road, we'd like to get into tequila because tequila is super fascinating, and
Yep.
tequila, agave, like all cactus spirits. There's a big category there. The Cristalinos and all that. Gin is really interesting in terms of what they can do with expressions. We are blind barrels. We could, I guess, do beer and wine at some point if we wanted to. We were going to do whiskey and tequila right off the bat, but it was going to split our marketing spend, and the energy of what it takes to create a lineup is a lot.
Right.
You're not just talking and trying the samples. I can't get into the legal elements of what we have to do to make this possible. Because when I was first exploring this, my buddy was doing blind whiskey tastings when quarantine started a couple years ago. I called him in the middle of the night after a long tasting. And I was like, dude, this is a business. And he's like, yeah, okay. And I was like, no, dude, this is the thing. I'm going to figure it out. And I was like, either this isn't allowed or it's just complicated. And then it turns out it's complicated. So, you can call any attorney, just so you know, if someone's going through finance issues, or they want to set up a trust, or they're going through divorce, or whatever that is, you can get a free hour-long consultation with most attorneys. Okay. So I did 16 of those with ABC alcohol beverage control attorneys. And the first 6 were like, because I'm like, I want to pour samples in the bottles. And they're like, you can't do any of that.
Nope. Like, that's a no. Yeah.
It's not allowed. Can't do it. I went, okay. And then I talked to one, and she's like, well, what you could do? You could do this. And it didn't solve all the problems, but it created an entry point, right? So I then took that into the next meeting. I'm like, okay, what if we do this? And they're like, well, and then we kind of inched our way there. And then even, when we raised the money, we had to create the brand, because in order to, it's not just so much to solve the problems. I mean, just to get a liquor license is a difficult process with city, county, state. There's a lot of red tape, and you gotta do meetings in front of City Hall, and I gotta get my skinny town like I'm Kevin Bacon trying to get the right to dance at my prom. Trying to convince everybody, and there's all these hoops you have to jump through. And yes, there's a reason nobody's done this before. It's not an easy process, but I do love starting something. I love the idea of breathing life into something. It gets me excited every day. And to get to showcase these brands is really it's so much fun, because when someone that that knows whiskey and knows a lot of brands and can tell you all of them, and you throw a couple of them that they've never heard of and they've never tried, and they're blown away by it, that's a pretty awesome just experience in general.
Yeah. The sort of echoes. I had a conversation with Ari Sussman, who works with 3 Chord and Mammoth and a handful of others. And he's, like, whiskey people just tend to do hard things. Like, that's the job in this industry, whether you're a distiller or a blender or doing what you're doing. You just sort of, decide you're going to do a hard thing, and then you figure out how to make it happen. I'm always sort of amazed at the wild audacity that everybody has whenever they start out. They're like, I have an idea and I'm going to make it go. And, if you sit down and just kind of evaluated from the beginning how hard and virtually impossible it is, you might never start, but you just sort of start. Like, that's what everybody I've talked to, at least at the craft level, they just sort of started. And once they got far enough down the path, they're like, well, I've already started. I'm not going to give up now. I'm going to keep going until we find whatever the solution needs to be to make this thing become a reality. But like, do you find it hard having these conversations? Because, like, I can talk about the people that I've talked to in the last few months, because It doesn't really matter. But like the conversations you're having with distillers, if you're like, oh, I talked to so and so, is that going to pull back the curtain on the next, Blind Barrels box, right? Like, do you have to like avoid having those I talked to this person conversations?
It's a good question because sometimes I use it to entice them. Because
Mhm.
if I'm talking to a distiller and I say, "Hey, in the upcoming lineup, we've got this is an example of who's going to be in our lineup. This is who was in our lineup," which isn't as much a reveal. I've revealed some of that, now. Um, it, for them to understand what we're doing, I don't think that this distiller is going to make a post and be like, "This is what's in their June lineup." I don't feel like I need to send a confidentiality
Like an
agreement
NDA.
over. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'm like, before I just told you a bunch of things. Yeah, sometimes I do have to let them in on trade secrets, obviously, in order to
Mhm.
make the process work. I'm not sending NDAs for that too, because even if I told somebody how we do what we do, you're going to be a year and a half away from being able to pull it off. So we got a little bit of a head start there.
Mhm.
So yeah, somebody could go figure this out, and you're gonna. I'm telling you, you're gonna cry in the middle of the night.
A lot. There's gonna be some ulcers. There's gonna be assorted things. I've seen a handful of other subscription boxes on the market. Not gonna name any names, obviously, but from what
You can
I've
you can name
seen,
names. I don't mind naming names.
well, I mean, like I'm trying to be a little bit respectful. I don't want to sound. This feels like the most well thought out and well put together version of it so far that I've seen. And you already
Thank you.
indicated anybody else that comes along is going to be a year and a half behind. Um, I, Without giving away the future, like I assume there's a path to like how you're going to continue to make yourself better, so no one can kind of take that year and a half and come out with something that's 3 steps ahead of you or anything.
Yeah, I mean, we're constantly evolving. Yeah, I mean, there's. I'll tell you, talking to all these brands was difficult because when we didn't have a site and we didn't have a logo, or we didn't have, there were certain things that, I mean, one of the first things I did was to create the branding and the logo and get the
Mhm.
monkey, and we wanted to have something that felt cool. Like, I wear my shirt all the time, not because it's my company, and I wear the
Right.
monkey hat. I love like wearing this stuff because I like our brand. And so creating that and sending them all that is great. But when you don't have a site, there's this element of trust that has to come into play. So we have a lot of respect for the distillers we talked to before we were a brand. We do have a lot of distillers reaching out to us now. The gentleman I said that I talked to on the phone yesterday was somebody that reached out to us. And I was hoping that it was good, and it's good.
Mhm.
But sometimes you get something weird and it's not good. But yes, we're constantly moving, we're shifting, we're growing, and we're trying to make every lineup beat the previous lineup. Now, I think at some point we'll plateau. Doing a barrel pick was really cool.
Mhm.
Getting to try a bunch of samples. I wish I could show you my shelf that I'm looking at right now that has just, literally hundreds of bottles on it. And I think there's this romanticized element when you're a quote unquote sexy industry, like, oh, filmmaking, and so isn't that great? And it's like, yeah, all right. Imagine you got to shoot 200 hours on hard days and talk to
Right.
widows and they're crying and you're
It's
having
it's
difficult,
it's sexy on the output, right? Like it's those things that you know there are people that go through experiences, let's just say making a movie. You get to the end, you go to the premiere and you see the final output, and it makes all of those moments that you had before worth it, but those still suck. But nobody besides the group of
nobody
people who
sees
went
that.
through that sees that. They see the sexy output. They see the bottle, they see the packaging, they see
Yeah.
the fruits of your labor. They don't see we're really close to not having any money left, or we've got to
Oh,
work, 20 hours a day for these next 9 days to get what we need done.
oh yeah. I could tell a million more stories about making films, but it is that someone was asking, like, when was the last time you watched your documentary? I'm like, dude, it's been a few years. They're like, really? And I'm like, I had to watch it like 4,000 times just to get it made, just making it, and then
Mhm.
the 100 other screenings, and I still screen at universities throughout the year and all this other stuff, right?
Yep.
And yeah, I still enjoy it to a degree, but there's this element of whereas I'm not at that stage with this yet, and I hope I never
Mhm.
will, because every lineup's different. We're constantly growing. Every distiller is completely different. But I'll tell you, making custom packaging sucks. Making custom bottles sucks. Making custom
Right.
caps to fit on these bottles, dealing with COLA, certificate of label acceptance, and trying to get all this stuff, dealing with all the things that we have to do in order to make this product, just to get the custom box that the box then goes in to ship out. All of these elements are not fun. I'll tell you, making the bottles alone was just a whole, like, you don't see a lot of glass bottles in this size.
Mhm.
Usually look at 375 to 750 when you're seeing a glass bottle. And I mean, I had to use like calculus to figure out the thickness of the glass to get the liquid right, and like all this stuff that we had to like go through. And we went through 8 molds because our bottle maker said, like, we don't make bottles this size in glass. Nobody goes less than 375. And I mean, and we finally got through the end of it. It took a year just to make custom bottles, like just
Yeah.
a whole year just to get to that point.
And
So
that,
yeah,
that seems like a tough thing to do, period. But then you kind of toss in, like you said, you're at year 2, or let's just say 3, and let's just say you're at year 3 of this. The beginning is before COVID, and this we're in one of the most unique logistical nightmares for anyone trying to build any type of thing, whether it be glass bottles or buildings or whatever, right? Like
oh yeah.
that in and of itself speaks volumes that like you made your way through that to here.
I feel like there's been kismet along the way. There's these there's these days where you wake up at 4 a.m. and you can't solve any of your problems. And yeah, I mean, my problem is I know all my investors personally. I am the biggest investor in terms of putting money into it.
Mhm.
Forget about the time, energy that's been put into it. So that's kind of my psychological out. As I tell everybody, I'm like, I'm going to lose the most. Um, and obviously I'm driven the most by it, but I care about all of my investors. They're not faceless people to me. So there is an added push to that. And it's a good and a bad thing, yeah, none of these people put their mortgage on the line or anything like that.
Mhm.
But you do carry a weight in any startup. Most startups. I was looking at somebody. It wasn't related to my company at all, but somebody posted on some social media thing like why startups fail, and it could literally just be the economy. It could have
Yep.
nothing to do with anything that you're doing, right? It could be a packaging mishap. It could be. I mean, we had a whole thing with our bottles that I'll tell you. If you talk to anybody in craft and you want to get in deep, talk about enclosures. Okay,
Mhm.
like there's all these different. Like I was watching Fred Minnick was talking to somebody, and he just started. He kind of has no filter, and he was like, "I really hate your enclosure," and he's like, "You guys, like, yeah, we're trying to solve that." I'm like, "Talk about the
Right.
whiskey, man, Jesus Christ!" Element to that, right? But I mean, our enclosure was a whole thing, like just trying to get the right cap, and we got this nice metal finish going on in order to
Mhm.
not just make the aesthetics of it work, but to make it actually work with our bottles. They're two completely different components that have to work together, and you could have just a physical product problem that caused your product to fail. And it could just be the market. Like I think the hardest thing about what we're doing is we're doing something that hasn't been done before.
Mhm.
We're putting these craft brands that you can't have access to in a box through a blind tasting. It's never been done before. So there is this learning curve where somebody's like, wait, I'm paying $50 a quarter to get half a bottle of whiskey. And I'm like, well, some of these are $150 bottles, so
Right.
there's that element, but there's a curation element to it. You can't get these things. I've seen other whiskey models that are $600 for half of what we're offering, and because they're making this high end thing. I mean, look, we got high end stuff going on too, but I couldn't price this in a way that pushes the middle class out of being able to buy it, because
Mhm.
we can't say we're supporting small distilleries and small businesses and then screw over the people that probably have small businesses.
Right.
There was a component in that, so I worked really hard to get all of our costs down as much as possible. And the whiskey's pricey because the way that it works and the way our model has to work in order to legally do it. We're not having anyone give their whiskey to us for free. I'm sure when we're huge, we can leverage that. But at the
Right.
same time, we're trying to uplift these small distillers and not squash them. We want it to be symbiotic. We want our distillers to win. We want our subscribers to win, and we want to win. I mean, even our bottle sales. If someone orders a full bottle, some people are like, "You're probably making a lot of money in bottle sales." I'm like, "Not really. I kind of we priced it the way it would be at a distillery." And
Mhm.
so when we have fulfillment partners that fulfill these bottles, yeah, they're making more than we are. And I was looking at our bottle sales in general. Like we did a lot of bottle sales in our first lineup. We really didn't make anything from it, and I'm okay with that. That's not really a part of our model at the end of the
Mhm.
day.
Yeah,
And
and it begs the question: if distilleries start giving you free bottles, does that impact your impartiality whenever you're kind of crafting this up? And I'll say, so I'd heard about Middle West before that box came out that had the pumpernickel rye in it. That specific bottle really messed me up whenever I was tasting through it. Like I felt like I had a pretty good grasp on things. When I got to that one, I knew it was good. I just didn't know what it was. Like I was sort of lost on that one.
Yeah, that impartiality is weird because we, for the most part, do get sent free bottles. That's probably the coolest thing there is. There are some people that are like, well, we don't know. We got to go find a way to get a bottle, right? And if we can find a way to get a bottle, then maybe we don't want them in the lineup. So there's a little bit of that too. I was just in Denver and I visited, 4 or 5 distilleries. I was there on a trip to meet up with my CFO and who had just moved there, and I was really being a supportive friend. But I'm like, I'm going to get some business done here. Now, there's a bunch of stuff at these distilleries that you couldn't get any other way. Right. And I'm not showing up talking to the owner. Some of them we did, but yeah, I'm buying some bottles in some capacity. But most of them do send us, for Middle West sent us like 6 things, including a bourbon cream. I mean, and I got to tell you, we were torn because when we had this lineup of all these blind whiskeys that we did, and we kind of threw them on all of them, they were in the top 3 every time. Every single one of their expressions crushed in a blind tasting. And they were all completely different. So whatever they're doing over there, they're doing it so well that I haven't had anything from them that's bad. It's only been really good. So if you do forget about the pumpernickel rye. I mean, don't forget about it because it's badass. Right. But if you see anything Middle West, wherever you are, I would buy it. I do buy it. I just never see it. I'm sure if you're in Ohio, you probably do.
You see it in Kentucky too. I've got a bottle over the shoulder here that I picked up.
Which one?
It's just their standard wheated bourbon, maybe.
They're wheated, yeah. They're wheated bourbon. Yeah, that's great. That's a summer sipper all day.
Yeah, I had it at a tasting with a friend, and you kind of touched on this of not wanting to you can't price it cheap, but you don't want to price people out. And I started collecting whiskey with the intent of like, I'm gonna have people over, I'm gonna do a tasting at my house, right? And like that's what I wanted to do. And then I had kids, and I don't know if you have kids or not, but there's like 2 different versions of clean that exists now. There's like everyday cleaning, and there's like people are coming into your home that don't live there clean.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, come over for whiskey tasting means like we have to go through all that. So when the pandemic hit, it was like a perfect opportunity for me to like, oh, fellow coworkers and friends, if you would like to join me on Zoom, I'll send you the stuff. Right. But the time that it took, and this is just for a fun tasting for me, the time it took for me to craft up and then, kind of parse out the samples to the 10 people that I'm doing it for was significant. Right. And so like, the thought that $50 being too much, it's really not. Like, where else are you going to go and get an opportunity to taste 4 uniquely different whiskeys that were put together with intent and with a lot of effort?
Right.
You're not, you might be able to go to some whiskey bars and they're going to have a flight put together, but likely that flight is going to be, these are all the Pappies, or these are all the Wellers, or
right.
This is the turkey lineup or whatever. Exactly. But you're not going to get this setup of craft. Go ahead. Sorry.
Totally. Well, you talk about the Zoom thing, and what we've had is, first of all, we have 4 or 5 people that can split a lineup. There's enough in these bottles. I mean, look, I'm a big dude. I can do one of these all myself. Not a problem. I like it when God lifts up on my cheeks a little bit, and I get a little bit of wonderment in my eyes. But you can easily share this with 4 or 5 people. Most people get it as couples, but one of the coolest things, and it wasn't what we thought of originally, was because we're in 42 states, we can ship to 42 states. So there's sons and mothers and daughters and fathers and brothers and sisters and cousins and friends and coworkers and people that have been disconnected from COVID, and the whiskey has been connecting everybody. Great whiskey is meant to be shared. So you can do a Zoom tasting. This box isn't like, hey, you order today, it comes tomorrow. So we have a one-off box. So if somebody wants to just buy a gift for somebody and not do subscription, yeah, we have a box for that. Okay. But if you're a subscriber, the lineup that comes, it comes mid-June, mid-March, June, September, and December. Everybody's going to get that same box, which will never exist again, at that same time. So it's a great way to bring everybody together over some awesome whiskey and to commit to getting together every 3 months instead of this kind of disjointed disconnect that we've had during COVID. Like, yeah, like I'm doing I'm doing tastings with all sorts of people. And yes, is it someone that's supporting the company, but it's a way for me to connect with friends that I haven't talked to in a while, and some family and even people I used to work with and all of that. So, we've gotten big group tasting groups together. We're going to be doing a live tasting for this next lineup, for our subscribers, if they're going to want to come in and, talk to the Whiskey Wizards or myself. And if you want to ask a really, low level question that you're a novice, hey, that's the forum for it. If you want to ask a really weird question that's like super deep and like, how come he's getting cherry and I'm getting almond? Well, they're tied to the same receptor in the brain but linked to a different memory, and somebody will have an answer for that, right? Or maybe they don't. So we're gonna have some of those live tastings too. But yeah, I think that's one of the coolest things that people are utilizing this for. Is I'm getting it for my dad and for myself, or I'm getting it from my mom. A lot of people think, oh, well, it's just guys. No, 30% of whiskey drinkers are women. A lot of people overlook women in that. Yeah, our boxes literally arrived right in time for Father's Day, and some people got mad about that. And they're like, what about Mother's Day? And I'm like, we backed up from Christmas. Okay, we went from Christmas to September. It just happens to be Father's Day in June. I'm not like hating on. I got 4 sisters and 2 moms, and so you know what I mean? Like stepmom and mom, but you know what I mean. You're like, oh, that's interesting. But and then to March, so like everything was kind of built around that, and we
it's
did
the way the
seasonal.
scheduling just happened to line out. It wasn't an intentionality to exclude folks, and I'll say that the sample size is fantastic for me because I've gone through it twice. I went through it completely blind, obviously. And then,
Nice.
I write down what I think I've got, and then I look at it and I'm like, oh, you're stupid. You don't know anything about whiskey, and this is fine. And then, I waited a few days, a week, long enough for me to sort of remember what bottles were in there, but not the order. And I did it again, still yet kind of disappointed in my own capability. And then there's still half a bottle left. And so I can do this now with my wife, right? Like I have an opportunity, and she doesn't have a connection to whiskey that I do, but she enjoys tasting through it and giving her like esoteric notes of this tastes like someone's grandmother's attic after 20 years of the house being mothballed. And a lot of the times,
This is
like
Grandma Judy's blanket. I knew it.
yeah, there was one that was, she was like, this sort of smells like the cleaner that they would put on the carpet and whenever I was a kid in church, and it was like a lemon scented carpet cleaner, and she's not wrong. Like like she's not wrong.
Yeah.
She was exactly right, but I don't do that. And so that anyway, it'll be an opportunity. There's still enough for both of us to run through it together now after I've gone through it twice myself. Now, obviously, like I could have drank a whole bottle in every one of those, but
yeah, look at your chef. You can't lie about it, right? Yeah.
that's not the intent behind it either. It's like, after if I did that by the time I got to the 4th one, it's good. That's about as far as I'm going to get,
You might be able to pull her over, to the dark side. You might be able to lure her in with with the process of it. We've had a lot of friends who their spouse, like one of my friends, her husband's not really a whiskey drinker. He's a tequila guy. She lured him into the whiskey world with the blind tasting. And look, I like tequila too. So I'm not impartial at all. When you went through the lineup, I'm curious because we can reveal, like, if you guys missed the March box, sorry, you're not going to want to miss the June one. But if you missed the March box, like I've already revealed some of the samples in there. Which ones were your favorites, and did it change when you went through it a second time?
Largely it was, if I remember my order, it was B, A, C, D, and I think it stayed the same. Maybe A and B flip flopped from the first to the second, but the first time I tried it, there was actually, I think I ended up being almost 2 weeks. I had 2 completely different work trips that occurred between the 2, so I really I remembered the Middle West was in there. But aside from that, I was like, I don't remember exactly what's in here because I had been to Chicago and I had been to North Carolina and I had been to like Nashville for a dance thing with my daughter. And so my brain was just like, look, it's out of memory. You're not in there anymore. But there wasn't one that I wouldn't be like, I wouldn't buy that. And that was what I really, really enjoyed, is that
B was a surprising pleaser. I'm not saying surprising. So B comes from its Drift. They're in San Clemente, and my parents live in San Clemente, and so Ryan Winter, the owner, and literally like I always liked their whiskey. So there wasn't a thing, but it was the only one that I foisted upon my whiskey wizards. And I'm like, we have to have them in the first lineup because we got to run through all this legal stuff with them. We got to beta test everything first. And I'm a big fan of it. And I talked to 4 different people a week ago that were subscribers that were, friends, and they all had a different favorite. They literally A, B, C, and D, completely different for everybody and what they like. I mean, so what's interesting about B and A, what you mentioned, those are both younger ones. So like B it's a 2-year wheated whiskey. Like they literally, they grow their own farm, like their family farm in Kansas, and they bring their wheat back and they distill, he mills it and everything. I mean, it's as grain to glass as you're ever going to get. Right. Phenomenal. Sample A is 10th Mountain. They're out of Vail. So Ryan Thompson, who's the head distiller, if you ever talk to Ryan, if you ever meet him when he's down there, just a cool, like real laid back guy. He called me afterwards because he just loved our packaging because I sent him a box, and he's like, I gotta get your packaging guy, and just a really just awesome dude. And they're blending a mix of different age statements actually into one thing. Both really easy to drink. Yeah, Middle West Sample C, they got a place in my heart just because they're great people. And D was an interesting one. I would say when you go through D again, proof it down a little bit.
Okay.
Not a lot. I wouldn't put a whole big ice cube on it unless you want to drink it fast. But proof it down a little bit. It is a high proof. And I'll tell you, in our June lineup, we got 2 barrel proof ones that are coming in hot.
Nice.
And I'm going to put a giant disclaimer because some people, especially novices, like, this tastes like gasoline. And I'm like, the people that are hardcore drinkers are like, this is amazing. I don't want anything in this. But when you proof it down a little bit, obviously it's going to make it more palatable and not taste like gasoline. But you're going to open up some flavors from it, right? There's that educational component to it. So Corbin Cash, the guy David Souza, I've actually got a case of it arriving later today because I've got a bunch of friends that want to buy it. And it was interesting, like they ended up in our lineup, like a friend was doing a barrel pick of theirs. I'd never heard of them. They're like 6 miles north of Merced. You got to like drive through Bakersfield and almost get murdered. Literally, don't stop at Bakersfield,
almost
gas and drive straight through it. You're going to die. Okay. And if the sun's down, you're definitely going to die. Sorry if you're in Bakersfield. And I'm telling you, you're in the middle of nowhere. This is farmer, and like his last name is Souza, and he couldn't name the whiskey after himself. And so the first day that his still started producing whiskey, right in the middle of it, his wife's water broke for his son, his first child. And his son's name is Corbin Cash Souza. So he named the whiskey after his son, which is pretty badass. And just one of these guys, he was making this bourbon mash to, one of the distributors was there and he was trying. He's like, "What are you doing with this?" He's like, I think I'm gonna blend it. I'm gonna blend it. He's like, "Dude, don't blend this." And so he went on to make a line out of it. And they entered 2 blind tastings that had over 100 brands in them, and it won best in show in both of them in a blind tasting. And it's interesting. Some people that high proof turns them off. But if you're tasting something that's high proof, I'm telling you, it's not the whiskey. It's that you're kind of, your palate isn't there. I had somebody that hated Sample D because they started with it. Like they're like, I'm a nonconformist. I'm going with Sample D. Like, screw you and your rules. I ain't following rules. And I'm like, all right, dude, you're gonna singe your palate right off the bat. You're gonna, you're just gonna get that wince, like that first time you get Listerine in your mouth and you got that canker sore, it's like you open up old wounds, whatever that is. But I mean, I've become fans. I have a couple bottles of everything in our lineup because I like it. And I don't think, I always say you're gonna like most of the things in our lineup, and you're gonna fall in love with 1 or 2. Like in our June lineup, yeah, we got an American single malt. Some people I'm a Scotch drinker, and I only drink Scotch, and then you turn them on to a bourbon. Some people are like, I only drink bourbon. I'm telling you what, in September we're gonna have a rye, and even in June, that barrel pack, I'm telling you, like it doesn't taste spicy at all. It's not your traditional rye notes at all. Most people couldn't guess what the mash bill was. We've got a rye in our September lineup that I put in a blind tasting against whiskey experts, and they all thought it was a bourbon because it was just so delicious, and there wasn't that traditional peppery thing going on with it. Not that we won't have peppery ryes, we won't have sweet bourbons and traditional things like that, but we're trying to surprise people at discovering what they like instead of going like, well, I only drink this, and I'm like, okay. Like honestly, I was never really an American single malt or just a Scotch person. If somebody's got the Johnny Walker Blue, you're gonna have a glass of it. I appreciate smoky peated whiskey like the next person, right? Well, I drink a lot of it when sitting, probably not, right? But I do like a little bit of it. But there's American malts out there that aren't smoky at all that are mind blowing.
Yeah, and that's where I think I'm not a big Scotch guy. Never was. Like I'm in Kentucky. I was born in Kentucky. I've been raised in Kentucky. So, bourbon is the whiskey that everyone has, and rye is a thing we think about afterwards. And then there's Tennessee, which has Jack Daniels, and forget those guys.
Yeah.
But
Jack Daniels is bourbon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, technically, yeah. I mean, like we can have that argument, but then somebody's going to come over here and be like, "Oh, you're a terrible person."
I know.
It's the fun argument to have. But before I started your particular flight, I actually sat down and I had a pre-flight pour of some like Old Forester barrel proof, like a single barrel proof, just because I wanted to let's start out at 130 so I can get acclimated if there is something here that is at a barrel proof. And so now I regret not like starting with D because I came off of 130 and then entered into those first three and then kind of ramped back up. And so I may do that next time because I didn't think about the proof at all.
Yeah, I had a buddy who he's straight out. He's like, I don't like D. And then he did it the next week. He's like, D's my favorite. And I went, I mean, some people
you were ready for it.
Yeah. And sometimes you're just having a bad day. There could be that, or you're, it's like when you brush your teeth and then you're like, before you have coffee and then you just screw up your whole thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I literally sometimes don't brush my teeth because I don't want to screw up my coffee.
Right. No. I'm with you. Yeah. Because, you might as well, like if you brush your teeth before you have the coffee, just might as well go ahead and go back to bed and start the day over again.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, man, I'm going back to sleep again. That there's this element to that. And it could be you ate something. There's different components, even psychologically. We had a podcast that did a tasting. Like we had a box that went out that wasn't any of our lineups. It was a special. I mean, everything in this box was badass. Everybody loved it. But there was one guy in a podcast that, I know I was talking to him and he was going through some difficult times at the time. And he loved the process, but he was dumping on like half of the brands that were in there that honestly are like, I mean, I thought they were all bulletproof. That's why we created this one-off box that they were all bulletproof. And I don't know. I think that, and there's even one where he was like, I normally really like this, but I don't like this right now when we hit the reveal. And I'm like going, no, I think you like it. You just don't.
It's maybe just today. That's just it is, with the lineup I had, depending upon the day, any one of them could be number one. And that's what I've experienced before with whiskey is that sometimes, it's what I had for breakfast, what I had for lunch, and what I had for dinner that night is going to impact what's going to be good at, 8 p.m., which doesn't seem like it makes sense, but you do this enough and you find out that does have some degree of impact on it.
Oh yeah, 100%. Absolutely. And I think it's interesting when someone does the lineup differently. Like one thing that's interesting also about D Corbin Cash is if you actually let it sit in an open glass, a half hour later, it's a totally different whiskey. Now that's always true. If you leave whiskey out long enough, it'll get weird. But there is a weird, is it like wine where, some wine, you got to open it up like 28 hours before you got to decant it and whatever. There's things like that. So some of the whiskeys right out of the bottle get better the more that they're sitting there. So if you're literally sipping and there's an evolution that takes place within the glass and there's some magic thing. I don't understand the dynamics of chemically of what oxygenation is doing.
Like what's happening there, yeah.
I don't know what's happening, but I loved how all the things in this lineup changed over time. And I'm excited to see what happens in June because, like I said, there's everything in there is phenomenal. And I will say this, if anyone is a subscriber that's either watching or becomes a subscriber, there is that 16-year barrel proof rye finished in a Weller barrel that won't exist beyond that. So
Mm-hmm.
there's only going to be, because we got so much of the barrel, there's only going to be maybe 60 of those bottles available. So I strongly suggest to get to the tasting faster than you normally would,
Right.
because you might fold
Prioritize
up.
this one.
You'll never be able to get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally going to be unattainable. It's unobtainium. Oh, no, that's a light whiskey, right? The cat's
Yeah.
eye, right? You had unobtainium?
I've got some over here. Yeah.
Yeah, Gene over there. I've talked to Gene. That guy's a really interesting guy, really nice guy, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had we're trying to put a light whiskey in at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just, because once again, there's an educational component to it.
Yep.
But it's interesting how, I mean, something that, just, it's a totally different experience when you're drinking something that is like that high proof. But like when I got into whiskey, I'm like, well, there's bourbons and there's not bourbons, right? And there's like, there's this mindset of like, well, what is a rye and what's a wheated and what is a malt? And like, I remember I was in a restaurant and I just overheard this woman. She ordered this set of oysters in a very particular order, and she's like, I want to start with this single malt, and then we're gonna move to this single. Like, it was like I was listening to like an expert order, like from American Psycho, or somebody pull up their card and be like, is that bone, and start sweating. Like, there was a whole, like, she was an expert, like foodie, drink order, whatever you want to call it. And I used to think, I'm like, how come she didn't order a double malt? Like, that.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm with you. I would have been in the same place, a dozen or more years ago.
And just so everyone knows, a single malt means it was made by the same distiller in the same season, in the same. So that's where the single comes from. Yep. So that's what it means. But I'm always like going, I want 2 malts in mine. Give me a triple malt.
If I mean, that's what we did with whiskey, right? Like, if a single oak is good, then gotta have a double oak bourbon, right? Like, that's the trend now. Just double it and it'll make it better. And then you double oaked it. Some people are double oaking things.
We did
out there.
A buddy of mine has a liquor store, and he did a barrel pickle Whistle Pig, right? 10-year.
Mm-hmm.
And by fluke, what happened is, because Whistle Pig's just making so much whiskey, their 10-year got put. They lost it. They lost the barrel for another 8 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But they couldn't call it their 18-year because their 18-year gets rebarreled, right?
Yep.
And so it's an 18-year Whistle Pig, but it's not.
In a 10-year label.
So I probably bought 20 of the bottles. I had probably friends that bought. I literally emptied this guy's. I'm like, dude, I'm going to tell a few people. And sure enough, we did a 10-year. We did the 10-year that was really an 18, and we did the 18-year. Now, I will say the 18-year that was rebarreled is on this whole other,
right.
It's on this whole other level, but it was really close to the mislabel, or not really mislabeled the way they had to label it. And the 10-year that was really 18 was completely like blew the 10-year, the real 10-year out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
So it was this great, like I just want to see, I'm like, is this a story that's telling me to make me buy this? But no, we tested it out, and we even blind tested it, and sure enough, man,
it all ran out the same way.
It was exquisite.
So the game is blind sampling, and I've got enough time for one more question here. I've got to move to another meeting for work related stuff here in just a few minutes.
You got to work. I know. I've got to get through all these samples over here that I can't show you.
Oh, what a shame! It's a terrible job, but somebody's got to do it. But so each one of your boxes contains 4 samples. You get that through a blind tasting that you do internally, and you've mentioned Whiskey Wizards. And so, kind of at the last bit, like, just give us how do you get to your 4 samples in a structure where you're allowed to share it. I mean, if you got something that's proprietary in here, obviously don't share that. But whatever you can give me here.
So like, I'm looking over at a shelf that I've created a set of samples. I mean, I can go grab them if you want to just count to 3 seconds. You can kind of see.
No, that's fun.
So this is as many as I could carry in one hand. So I make these 30 milliliter samples of whiskey, and they all got letters on them. Now, what's interesting is we've run out of letters and we've run out of numbers. So now I'm combining numbers with letters.
Yep.
So
it's like algebra. So it's like algebra.
there's 50 different numbers and there's 26 different letters. So 50 times 26 is going to be, I think, 1,300 or something like that.
Yeah.
Look at that math. There's 1,300 possibilities. So eventually we're going to run out of that. And so what I do is once I've talked to a distiller that either's reached out to us or we've heard about them, we want them in our lineup, we say send them the expressions that you think we might be interested in. So sometimes they send us their whole lineup. Sometimes they only send us their flagship, which is their standard brand. I make these samples and we give them to my whiskey wizards who they've been at this a lot longer than I am. But I have 6 other people that are like my CFO. He's a layman. He doesn't really drink a lot of whiskey. We love their input. We have people that are kind of like me. Like I kind of weigh in where I'm like in that stage where I'm busting out of the novice stage, and everybody weighs in on what they liked. Now, first we were doing it where I didn't tell them what the mash bill was, and that started creating problems because like right now we have a ton of malts and ryes that we like, and we don't have enough slots for them. So we're trying to kind of figure that out. And we're just up front with the distillery, and this is kind of how I don't blood on my hands. I'm like, look, my whiskey wizards are going to decide, and it's really I want them to have autonomy, but they're really great at listening to everybody's input. This isn't just what they like. This is kind of the collective speaks. In fact, 10th Mountain, one of our investors and his brother, their tasting notes were like, tastes like alcohol, too alcohol-y. Like literally, like that's like their tasting notes, right? But when they got to 10th Mountain, they're like, this is really good, right? Now they couldn't tell you the notes, they couldn't tell you the proof, they didn't get into any of that stuff. And that held some sway in the way that we looked at this, right? Even Drift, like the one that you like, that's a 2-year whiskey. It doesn't taste like it. I'm telling you, you put a small rock in that on a summer's day. I mean, it's amazing. It's so good. It changes, it evolves, it grows. So once they get all these things in their lineup, and sometimes I'm giving them like 20 of these, nice job to have. Okay. They go through them and they kind of put them in the different tiers. Now they're not necessarily ranking them. They're saying these are all awesome. These are okay. And we hated these, right? So it's kind of more like that to keep it simple. And then we kind of disseminate, we talk about it, and they're not always on the same page. So for instance, the 16-year rye, they sent us this group, this distillery sent us 4 samples. One was a 3-year, one was a 9-year, and there was two 16-years that were in the group. Now, yeah, of course, we want to get our hands on the 16-year, but the 9-year was really good too. And one was finished in a ruby port barrel, 128 proof. One was finished in a Weller barrel. Now, for some reason, the Weller barrel, it doesn't taste like 125 proof. It tastes like 100 proof. I don't know how that wheated barrel finish did that, but it's mind-blowing. And they were battling as to who should be the one. So we had to then go to a bigger set of people. And it was like tallying, like people on both sides. Like we knew we wanted them in our lineup. We're just trying to literally pick a barrel. And it was a battle, and we ended up arriving on that one. And it'll be interesting when you go through our lineup if you'll be able to tell which one of those is the 16-year rye finish in a Weller barrel. Because I think you'd be surprised, to even say, "Is this a rye? Like, what is this?" I know it's amazing, but and maybe I'm tipping my hat too much about what it is. Now, once we talk to a distillery, we want them in our lineup. We generally know 3 to 6 months before they're in our lineup. Like our September lineup, I've known 2 of the people that are going to be in there for a year, mainly because we were timing up with their process a little bit. We knew we loved them. We want them in the lineup. They're both female distillers. It's funny, we sometimes people are like, "Oh, are you only putting in female distillers?" I'm like, "No, we're blind tasting everything. We're literally not putting in people of color or women or transgender or white. We're not doing, there's no rhyme or reason. I love any from when that group can be in the lineup, right? But our process is totally blind in how they end up in that lineup. The fact that they're female distillers is great, but that has nothing to do with it at all. But we slotted them in a very particular spot that worked with them, and now we're building the lineup around them. And then there's a whole process before it lands in our boxes and then gets to you that I can't get into. But that's really how we decide. And sometimes there's a distillery that, there's a pricing element that doesn't work. That doesn't work with our model. We don't have anyone giving it to us for free. We do have some that we like that offer it at cost, which is awesome. because then sometimes we can get a more rarer thing in the lineup. So there's always this balance that's going on. But yeah, there's a whole process that goes into play that we know what's going on at least 3 months in advance, because we have to work through this cycle and the logistics of, when I talk to people and investors about like what goes into this, and they're on the inside, they're like, wow, this really is complicated. I'm like, I know. I just got 50,000 of these caps that it literally took just 6 months to get these caps done, and that whole process. And, so there's a lot of energy and a lot of love that goes into these boxes. It is a great gift, but I think it's great when you can share this either with somebody in your household, like you're about to do with your wife, or if you have that connection, you got that friend, family, coworker, whatever. And you guys can just commit to hanging out over some badass whiskey every 3 months. And we do have limited number of slots. Part of the thing, it's not like, if 2,000 people signed up tomorrow, I mean, we only have like another 150 slots for our June lineup, and we haven't even really started marketing for that yet. So there is literally limited space available. There is exclusivity. What's going to happen is, as we get closer, we get a wait list, and then we give those people priority when we go into the next box. But we have to do that because we can't sit on a bunch of inventory, unfortunately. And that's a big difference on our model. And another reason why it's not easy, but another reason why it's awesome.
So the wait listing sounds like a whole other logistical nightmare that you're going to get to try to explore at some point in time. And given the model that you're building and the kind of the value of what you're doing, I don't think you'll have any problem getting to the wait list. It's just sort of managing it. Like I said, I've got to bounce to another meeting here in just a second, so I appreciate you for being here.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Any other time that you want to talk, like, I got through probably a third of the questions that developed while we were talking, not to mention the ones that I already had before we even began.
Okay.
This is what it is for me. Like, the only reason I do this is to be able to have these conversations. So you did give away a little bit about the next box, but luckily like 10 people listen to this, so you don't have to worry about too many people finding out about it.
There's 10 people in. Come on.
Right. Yeah. Well, all 10 of them. Yeah. Like I said, I appreciate you for being here. I'm going to bump you out, hit my outro, and then we'll chat a little bit. All right. Thanks for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform that you're consuming this on, and you leave a comment if possible. You can hit me up on social media, on Twitter or Instagram using EmbellishPod. You can give me a follow, see what's going on next. I can be found also at www.embellishpod.com. All of my links, accounts, contact details. I'll be back again next week with another new offering. So until then, cheers and thanks for hanging out.